How about a short marathon for a Sunday afternoon? I've got two stories. They're both really good, and I hope you enjoy it. And I hope you're having a good weekend. Let's get going with it. All right, here we go. Hello, my name is Cindy. I've been listening to your channel for several weeks, and it's made me decide to tell my story. I'm okay with my name being put out there, as I'm also aware of the ridicule that comes with this. I know what I've heard and what I've seen and what has happened to me at home. The good Lord knows what I've experienced too, so that's all that matters to me. I'm a 54-year-old woman. I live in Northeast Texas in Hunt County, 12 miles north of town in a community called Kellogg. I've lived here for the last 12 and a half years. My husband is a truck driver who is only home one day a week on the weekends. My story starts during the summer of 2017. I was awakened from a sound sleep by three loud bangs on the back of my house. I shot straight up, knowing instantly that I didn't dream it because my two little dogs flew off the bed at the exact moment and ran into the living room barking. I stumbled to the kitchen thinking who would be banging on my house at this time of night. It was 2:38 a.m. I went to the back side of the house where the noise had come from, and I looked around out the window and I saw nothing in the back. I then checked the front and everything was clear. My husband was on the road that night. I called him and he told me to call the sheriff's office. Two deputies came out and they looked around everywhere, even in my horse trailer. They found nothing. At this point, I'm thinking someone is just trying to mess with me. I have neighbors that live close, not like in a subdivision, but close enough. The reason I wrote this will become apparent later. That summer was my first incident. Never did it once occur to me that it could have been anything other than a person. During this time, my father had passed away and I quit my job to take care of my mother. She lived 3.5 hours away and I was gone a lot during the next 2 years. In 2019, my mother was better and I got to be home more. In the fall and winter of 2019, I was propped up in bed watching television with only my bedside lamp on along with a light over my stove in the kitchen. It was between 8 and 10 p.m. and out of nowhere I heard a loud growl over my television. None of the dogs in the area were barking and my dogs weren't either. They bark at even the slightest sound. They were all quiet. I went back to watching TV, not giving it another thought. About a month later, I was doing the same thing, propped up in bed and watching TV, when again, out of nowhere, I hear the same loud growl out my bedroom window. My bedroom window is only 2 feet from where I was sitting. Again, there was no barking from the dogs. I paused the TV once again to listen, and I heard nothing. I resumed my TV show. 2 months later, I'm doing the same thing, propped up watching TV in bed, and at the same time frame, around 10 p.m., I hear out of nowhere that same growl. I paused the TV and I thought, there's no way. No dogs again were barking. I listened, but I still heard nothing. This is crazy, I thought. By this time, I began to think it was a big cat, and as long as it didn't hurt my dogs, I wasn't going to worry about it. A month later, while in the same spot watching TV, I heard something rubbing on the back of my house. I could tell by the noise that this was a big animal. The noise was high on the wall, higher than a big cat could reach. My dogs were going crazy this time, and I began to worry. I turned the TV off, and I sat in the darkness and I listened. I waited on something to happen, but it never did, thank goodness. I fell asleep not long after that. A few days later, I decided to talk to my neighbor. She's a single lady who lives alone behind me, to see if she had seen or heard anything. I didn't know Kim very well and had only spoken to her a few times since she had moved in during the summer of 2017. I didn't tell her about my experiences first because I wanted to hear what she had to say on her own without the influence of my experiences clouding anything she might say. I simply asked her if she had heard or seen anything strange around her home at night. She began to tell me what she had heard. She said that several times at night she had heard growls and grunts by her bedroom window. On one occasion, she heard heavy footsteps or something big on her deck. She had a wooden and metal picnic table on her deck that was very heavy. The night she heard something large on her deck, she heard a thud on the deck. The next morning, as she was leaving, she saw that her picnic table had been knocked off on the ground and turned over. She went on to say that she had heard whistles and bird calls in the middle of the night. She sleeps with her windows open at night, and for the next month, her and I kept in touch. The strange things happened constantly. Rocks were thrown at our houses. There were knocks on the walls. We kept hearing these growls. It was happening more often, and we compared notes every few days. On a cold winter night in 2019, I was outside messing with the dogs, and I noticed a track in the mud. It was a huge, human-looking barefoot track. I measured it, and it was 16 inches long. I even took a picture of it. Kim and I became friends through this ordeal. In time, I discovered that she believed in Bigfoot, and we started thinking of all these events and could they be Bigfoot related. I showed her the picture of that track, and I think that sealed the deal for her and I. This was a Bigfoot visiting our neighborhood. My husband didn't agree, though. He thought Bigfoot was a myth. Kim and I started checking on each other every night. Nightly phone calls at bedtime became our ritual. One night, as we were talking on the phone, we were discussing how in the last couple of weeks our dogs and all the other dogs up and down our road were barking and going crazy every night. On this night, I asked her to hold on while I yelled out to my German Shepherd to hush. As I stood on the porch, I heard it. It was that howl that is so common with Bigfoot. I had never heard anything like it before, and I stood there frozen in disbelief. After the howl ended, everything was dead quiet. There were no insects, no dogs, nothing. It was like they knew what they had heard. But not long after that, the dogs began to bark again all over the area when another howl rang out louder than before and shut them all down once again. I remembered that Kim was holding for me, and I ran back inside, and when I got her back on the line, she was standing on her back porch, and she had heard the howl too. We both locked ourselves inside and tried to settle down. When I hung up with Kim, I called my husband, and I told him what had happened. He asked me why I thought this was only happening to Kim and I and not anyone else in the area. Well, I asked if he thought I was crazy, to which he assured me he didn't think that we were experiencing something. He just didn't think it was Bigfoot. From that day forward, I dreaded my husband leaving for work. I was terrified to be alone in that house. I cried every time he left for a week on the road. And I know he felt bad, but he had to work. What came next, though, sent me over the edge. It was my husband's 5th night home after being on the road for a long time. It was a night in April of 2020, and it was 11:30 p.m. My dog started going nuts outside. My husband was home, so I wasn't afraid. We both thought it was a small critter, so I began setting off my car alarm to scare the raccoon or the cat away. After 2 or 3 tries, the dogs continued to bark. Continuing to set the alarm off was eventually going to annoy my neighbors, so I stopped that. I walked outside to shut my dogs up, and I noticed my cat curled up on the rocking chair. I reached over to pet her, and a mean growl came from real close just around the corner of the house. That cat jumped up and was gone in a flash. By this time, my husband was walking out on the porch with me. I told him what had just happened, and we walked back into the house, and we headed for the back door. He turned off the back porch light and he stepped outside. He didn't see anything. I went back to the front to call my dog inside. The dog was a ways out in the yard, but she wouldn't come to me. She always comes when I call. Eventually, she began to trot towards me, but she had her eye on the corner of the house where I'd heard that growl. She was alert and almost coming reluctantly. She stopped on a dime only a few feet from the corner and started backing up. She could see something around the house that I couldn't. It scared me to death. I slammed the door shut and I ran to the spare bedroom where a window would give me a view to that side of the house. And that's where I saw it. I could not believe how big this thing was. It was a massive creature and it stood just a few feet away from the house. It was 8 feet tall at least and as wide as a Volkswagen. It began to walk away from the house, and I saw its long arms swinging at its side. I also noticed that it didn't appear to have a neck from the back. I yelled out to my husband, "Oh my God, I see it. It's huge. It's a Bigfoot." He ran up behind me and he looked over my shoulder, asking me to point it out. I pointed in the direction that it was walking away, but by the time he got there, it was obscured in darkness. It was gone. Why hadn't he seen it? And then I began to question myself. Had I really seen what I thought I had seen? Or was I seeing something I wanted to see? Over the next week, I went to that window many times during the day and at night, looking closely to determine if I had mistaken something else that may have looked like a Bigfoot. There was nothing there even close to the shape of what I had seen. Plus, the creature I saw was walking away. It was moving. The next Saturday, I was mowing the grass on that side of the yard. The whole time I mowed grass, I looked carefully for any evidence that may have been left behind. It had not rained for a while and everything was dry except downhill from our septic tank. It's sandy there, and this is where I saw it. I shut the mower down and I ran to get my husband. He studied the ground for a few minutes and I finally asked him what he was looking at. "You don't want to know," he said. "Really, Buck, tell me what you see," I said. He agreed that it was a huge human-looking barefoot track in the sand. I took several pictures of it, and now we both knew what I had seen. I called the game warden and I told him everything that had been happening, and I sent both pictures to him. He said it was not a bear track or a big cat track, and that's pretty much all I got from him. I then called the BFRO, and an investigator has been out twice already and confirmed that we do have Bigfoot activity. The investigator said that he wanted to do a Q&A at my place and for me to speak with my neighbors to see if they had seen or heard anything around their homes. I didn't want to do that. I didn't want to be thought of as a nut, but after talking to several neighbors one at a time, it became clear that Kim and I were not the only people having these encounters. I was shocked to find that some of the neighbors had heard strange things and others have actually seen one, much like I did that night in April. My husband finally saw one crossing Highway 69 one night. He said it made it across both lanes in 3 steps. He is now a believer. It has also become obvious that there are more than one living close by. I don't know how many, but definitely more than one. Neighbors have started missing calves, pigs, and chickens, along with domestic pets, and we still have plenty of activity several nights each week. I don't want any harm to come to these creatures, but I do want them to move on, and for good. I'm still terrified to stay at home alone at night. I always make sure that I'm in the house and locked up before the sun goes down. Well, Cindy, that's one hell of a story. That's all of this stuff is happening recently. To put it in a time frame, it's going back to right when this corona thing started, so you guys listening can know this is just in the last 6 months. and it's in Northeast Texas. She kind of gave you the pretty much exact location of where it's all going on. I'm wondering if anyone else that listens to this channel could send me an email and let me know if you're having any other activity in that area. I know Northeast Texas is a hot spot for Bigfoots. And Cindy and Buck, I guess you guys just live in a hot spot. I mean, they're just there. And I understand that those Bigfoots in that area are not the nicest they don't have the nicest temperament. So you guys be careful. You guys be careful and know what you're dealing with. And I'm glad you got the BFRO in it. Obviously, they've confirmed that something's going on there, so that's good. If something bad happens, the key will be to get the law to believe what's really going on. But that probably won't happen. You guys just be safe. Thanks for writing this to me, Cindy. It was really good. All right, this next story is from Bill. And here's what Bill writes. Shortly after moving to, let's see if I can pronounce this, Saskatoon in 2013 from beautiful British Columbia, where we enjoyed camping and going on day drives, we found ourselves in an area void of such beauty and opportunity. When the spring hit, I looked for an area that we could get away from the city and do some camping. I found that traveling north to a national park called Prince Albert had the hills, lakes, streams, and forests that we missed. We drove for 3 hours north and found a place to set up camp, not knowing much beyond a few pictures and descriptions that I had found online. We arrived Monday on June the 24th, stopping at every lake to find a place that would enable us to be by ourselves. And we kept heading deeper north into the park. We drove to the end of the road to a large area called the Narrows Campground. We found only a few campers in the area, and in fact, it was basically otherwise deserted. We came to a spot that was higher than all the other areas, and we found a spot that would accommodate our large tent on the outside edge of the camping area and away from possible neighbors that might move in. After pitching the tent and setting up camp, we decided to familiarize ourselves with our new surroundings. It was a chore getting everything set up with my wife, 2 girls, and our pit bull. Behind our campsite was a deep ravine with a shallow creek running through it 40 feet below. Descending into the valley was impossible. There were 3 game trails that converged on our campsite and appeared to be well used. One of my girls found a large jelly-like pile of feces just off of one of the trails closest to our tent. My manly duty required me to remove it. I was required to clean up the forest so as not to have it find itself stuck to any of my women's shoes. There would be hell to pay for that. The next morning, a fox strolled through our sight, not giving me much of a thought and passing within 6 feet or so with no more than just a glance here and there while I was attempting to make it stop by talking to it with no success. In my years, I've had a strange magnetism for the unexpected animals that come up to me. However, this one gave me no mind whatsoever and went about its way. Later that day, a park ranger checking sites stopped by to welcome us, doing so each day for the 5 remaining days. On our 3rd day, when our daily visitor came by for his checkup, meaning the ranger, and to have a brief conversation, he told us that it was not advisable to let the girls walk around together, especially alone without an adult. I asked him if he meant at night, and he responded with an adamant, "That's right." He stated that there are very few people here and that there had been some bear activity in the area. No one had seen one, but he was sure that it would come soon and that we should be on the safety end of error. With that, he gave his farewells and he left. Not far away was a bait store with a boat mooring. The place had a children's playground. My daughters had already walked to the store, but we expected them back any minute. We didn't think much about it. The store was closed, so we began to prepare dinner. When the sun was setting and they had not arrived back, I drove down to the area to find them. They were not there and there was no one around. I proceeded to drive the entire area, searching and asking the few that I came across if they had seen them, with no success. I started to imagine the worst, that they had gotten lost and would be frantic. I headed back up to our campsite thinking that I must have missed them and that they were back waiting on my return. But when I got back to the campsite, it was dark and the girls had not arrived. It would be a 30-minute drive around the lake to even find someone to help. I made one last round through the camping area and to the store, and I found my daughters with a woman I had seen before, and I had asked her if she had seen my daughters, and she said she had not. Now here they were with her. I was upset, and it showed. I brought them back, and we ate, and then we went to bed. At some point during the night while we slept, I heard a whoosh on the outside of the tent, as if something or someone raked their hand across the fabric. It was above my oldest daughter's head, and it woke her up. She sat straight up like Linda Blair in The Exorcist, saying, "Dad, what was that?" Thinking of the fox, I told them that it was more than likely a small animal running by the tent, and not to worry. Soon we were all back to sleep, and the night was uneventful after that. We spent the fourth and final day hiking and exploring. We ate as the sun dipped below the horizon. It had been a great day. The girls went to bed at 10 p.m., while my wife and I sat by the fire waiting for it to die down enough that we could leave it, and our dog sat between us. Earlier, while searching for firewood, I sensed something close to the ravine that I had mentioned earlier. I don't know what it was. There was no sound or visual. I just had a feeling that something was there watching me. While my wife and I sat close to the fire that night, that feeling stayed with me. The dog raised his head and ears several times, looking in the same direction. I didn't mention it to my wife, and we continued our conversation. It wasn't long before my wife and the dog went into the tent to settle down for the night. She told me not to stay out too late, and she went to bed. That feeling I had been experiencing most of the afternoon, it got stronger. My rational mind began to explain the feeling. If something was there, I would have seen or heard something. Maybe I had been imagining this. The fire dwindled to coals, and I stood and faced the area of my imaginary onlooker, and I said in a low voice, "Good night." To this day, I don't know why I did that. Laying there listening for some kind of movement or noise and not hearing anything, I began to fall asleep. Just as I was about to doze off, I heard a light metal tink that brought me back to full awake. The only metal objects left outside that would make that noise were a skillet that I placed in a larger pan until morning. Nothing else could have made that sound. It was only that one sound, and I apparently went to sleep after that. The next morning, I was up first. I got dressed and I went out to inspect the pot and pan, finding it as I had left it. I went on to build the fire and make coffee, and I pulled our cooler out of the back of the expedition. The girls got up and I made them breakfast, and all was well until my wife woke up. My wife was grumbling and tossing things about in the tent. I went in to check on her. She was making our bed as if she were angry at it. She gave me a look that would kill, like I had just been caught having an affair. Of course, I asked her what was going on, and I got an angry reply, "Nothing." I asked her over and over, trying to see if I could make this better, but she wouldn't say a word. So I dropped it, and I left her to terrorize that bed some more. She spent the day giving me those looks, and I couldn't remember doing anything to her. I was confused, and she wouldn't talk about it. Finally, as we were ready to leave, she told me. Her description was, at best, a huge reality check for me, and it was not what I could have ever imagined. That night, my wife woke to a large hand pushing into the side of the tent, fondling her head, feeling around and encapsulating the top and sides of her head all at once, she said. She could see the tent pushed in over her face and distinctly felt large, long fingers groping her head. She tried frantically to wake me by nudging and pushing and hitting and talking low to get me to wake up. She even rolled almost entirely on top of me, but nothing would wake me. She was afraid to scream or to move, but she did so with caution and slow calculated movements as it was doing what it was doing. It stopped abruptly, and she watched the hand move down the fabric, making that whoosh sound all the way to the end of the tent, and then it was gone. Soon after, the ranger stopped while making his rounds. I asked him if there had been strange occurrences reported in the area. His smile and happy demeanor turned into a stern one as he said, "Like what?" And then I asked if anyone reported someone or something coming into their campsite at night, or just anything strange. "Nothing strange," he said. I explained that something had been in our campsite the night before, and it had tried to get in our tent. He shrugged, and he reminded me that he had warned us about the bears. Oh, man, Bill, that's a great story. That's 2 stories where 2 game officials or rangers are given a report of these strange creatures messing with a tent or coming into someone's yard, and they don't ever even address it. They never even address it. I don't know any of the game wardens in my area, but if I ever run up on one or one checks my license, or even out in a boat checking my fishing license, I'm going to pin them down and ask them how many Bigfoot reports they get and how many people talk about these things. I have a way of getting people to talk to me, so I think I might be able, if I'm persuasive enough, I might be able to get some information out of them. But these 2 stories have made me think about that, and now I'm just hot on a game warden. I got to find one and start talking to them. And maybe I can get one recorded with my podcast machine. That would be fun. All right. Thanks, Bill, for the story. You did a great job writing it. I appreciate it. And I know we all enjoyed it. And thank you all for a little bit shorter video, but it's about what I had time to do this weekend. And I hope you enjoyed it. All right. We'll see you guys on the next one. Thank you.